he's not doing you a favor. He's having a problem with China. You have a problem with China. You're saying, okay, let's find some common ground, see whether we can coordinate our policies. It's not as if he's doing us a favor, we are doing him a favor, but we don't see what's going on in the US because, as I mentioned in the later part of the article, I mean, the amount of changes that are taking place, which is huge, but there is very little coverage.
Hi, sir. I hope you're well. Hi, everyone. We're back. We had a week's break because of technical issues last week. This week, Sir Raja Mandla, you've spoken about the convergence between Delhi and Washington and increasing, both in terms of government-to-government cooperation and the attitude of the state as such of the Indian state towards America has softened or has become more friendly. And the geopolitics of the current time is also very amenable to the two countries working more and more closely together. But one of the things you do say, one of the main points in the article is that while there is this sort of, at the government level, there seems to be a lot more openness towards the United States, that is not reflected in, say, society or particularly among the elite, a particular kind of, let's say, the old Delhi elite, as well as a sort of intellectual elite. So first question, I'll play a bit of devil's advocate. Is that really the case? You know, it seems in some ways even the idea of the elite being anti-America has actually gone away to a large degree. One, as you say, in governments, but even it's particularly since liberalization of communication. You know, just in terms of America, soft power has had such a vast impact on anyone, say under 40 in India right now. That entire youth, even if you're not English speaking nowadays with dubbing, you know, I think that all of that plays into that role of America being actually more, of course, aspirational, but also very, very accepted. So don't you think that's actually had an impact in this in this entrenched anti-American elite, if anything, is a small anachronism?
But look at even the media coverage. There is, see, look at at the government level, things have changed. But if you look at shall we say, the foreign policy community, there's still constant self-doubt, expression of is it going to happen? So there is that lingering thing in the whole community of the think tanks, retired ambassadors. So there is that still a sense of probably this is not real and this is kind of strange. And that's one feeling. Second, I think if you look at the media political elite, it is still, we are so jumpy when it comes to the US. The kind of, even the smallest statement gets such a high, becomes a controversy. But as the minister Jaishankar once said, look, the street has changed. You are right, that the masses, the diaspora, 4 million, Indians, the kind of traffic to and fro, even at the worst time of the Cold War, the public in India had no problems with the US. It was really the elite that had the problems. But I think what I said, look, it has declined because of the political investment by successive prime ministers and the actual expanded sphere of cooperation that has widened the interface between the two societies. But yet, if you see even the last 2 days, some deputy assistant secretary says something about human rights, that he will take up human rights. It's on the front pages of, our newspapers. Why do we, is that something is that the main purpose of the Blinken's visit? And we've seen so much else is going on. But I think that sense that, look, it is still an unstable relationship. Something will happen. Like yesterday I saw one news report which said, India is reassured that Biden will not mediate on Kashmir. Come on, are we really still in that age where Americans have enough headaches on their table and nobody is dying there to mediate on Kashmir? But I think that inertia in the coverage, certainly in the media coverage of India-US relations, I think endures. And the Twitter controversy, so moment something involving America takes place, then we get into this America versus us. But actually, look, Americans are arguing about Twitter. Yeah. They're saying, look, can one private company remove the president of the United States, elected leader? Can you deplatform him? That's it, their internal debate. But we make it look like everything is between us and the Americans. So I think there is a residual thing. So one was only highlighting that to
So anyway, take off from that as a follow-up. There was an interesting line in your piece about we still think like a sort of insecure small power, something to that effect. It's in the piece. Everyone should read the piece. It will be on the IndianExpress.com, of course, and probably in the description wherever you're watching this. Uh, is that, and that I think, I mean, it's somewhat reflected, like you're saying, in the media coverage. Often, in terms of when you see government reactions as well to magazine covers, like we can say, for example, in the Indian Express, we have often, when President Trump used to make some slightly ridiculous statement, we've done a satirical editorial, we've carried pieces by clever writers who've poked a little fun at him. You don't see, frankly, the American establishment getting, or the envoy in Delhi or Bombay or Calcutta getting chagrined by personal attacks. And it seems that in that sense, even that India's own insecurity may have more to do with, and of course it's reflected in the media coverage, but there is a governmental insecurity as well, and also government bravado at certain times. But how do you think that attacking liberal media houses in the West for the way they cover, say, our prime minister or certain the riots in Delhi, the violence in Kashmir, do you think we also need to act, if it's a long-term, deep, mature relationship? We're not China. We understand how democracies work. I mean, we should. So, in that sense, how do you think that also has it's just noise in the?
Yeah, I think that insecurity is real. I mean, I think we tend to overreact to everything that appears. I mean, even just an editorial in Washington Post, that the media is amplifying that sitting from Washington. Or you have the press conferences in White House. Are you going to take up human rights question? Like we kind of, there is that constant self-reinforcing of the negative, and then the standing up in front of your domestic audiences becomes a posturing kind of a thing. Look, I think everybody has problems, and I think there is room to engage each other, and that we need to go beyond this of this prickliness, which had long characterized India's engagement with the world. That's the point, and that you're today the sixth largest economy. Yeah. You're third largest military spender. So at what point are you going to be saying, look, I'm comfortable under my skin, I have problems with China, I have problems with Pakistan. I mean, I'm not going to agree with the Americans on everything, but there is business to be done with everyone. And there will be differences, even with our best friends. Yeah. I mean, that's the world. I mean, we're not into saying, look, America must endorse, or every American newspaper, every commentator, every congressman out of 435 House of Representatives and 100 senators, they must keep saying nice things about it. It's not going to happen. So I think we need to be more relaxed and deal with the world. And it's not as if Americans are innocent. Look, they've dealt with a complex world as global leaders. I mean, they've had partnership with a non-democracy like Pakistan, China for 40 years. So somehow this idea that something Americans are going to jump in and do something to us. And I think partly it's also an expectation in the liberal elites in India. Somehow America can intervene in our internal quarrels. That is, look, if the opposition does not like the prime minister, if the Americans pull him down a peg or two, that's kind of, there is a satisfaction with that kind of thing. But I think it's really because they have their own interests. It's not as if there is a judge, or a jury sitting out there deciding who's the best and is everyone kind of sticking to the correct moral code. There's no such thing. We are a world of sovereign states where we do some business, we have differences, and that's part of life.
So then another, just to pivot, there's I thought an interesting point in this piece was when you talk about just the intellectual engagement, in terms of understanding research. On the one hand, like I said earlier, is that in terms of soft power, we have a huge amount of interest in America. We get American culture, we get, and to a asymmetrical extent, but more so than before, Indian culture there as well. But the idea that we haven't actually spent enough across the board building intellectual capacity. And we had an advantage, for example, with the English language and that history that China never did. And they've exceeded us in this regard. How will that, with America, it's the most glaring because one would imagine it's so much easier. We all have American academics often writing for our newspapers. We have conversations, yet that institutional engagement with the US as a unit, as a cultural, political, international. Yeah. Do you think that increasingly, that much you say in your piece, but that that is something that India, in its intellectual, both not just in terms of, not just think, oh, as an HR resource. I mean, not just, oh, we need more engineering colleges to build, but to build quality institutions, whether it's government or whether it's the private sector, is going to be increasingly important as India engages with the world, with superpowers like America, with smaller nations. That is a huge gap, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
No, exactly. I mean, I think that's a very important point. I think as a general rule, we've underinvested in studying the world. I mean, about themselves on their own terms. Even Pakistan, which is next door, the language is the same, but still, I mean, we've not invested in understanding Pakistan, Pakistan. It becomes all the time a quarrel or dispute. Or similarly with China, I mean, where we have huge problems, but it's only recently we have some growth in the Chinese studies. But American studies doesn't exist. That barring one or two departments.
Bangladesh, America, there are friends and neighbors.
Yeah, but like while the Russians and the Chinese, I mean, I've seen, I mean, at the height of the Cold War, how much the Russians Soviet Union invested in studying the United States, understanding their politics. Chinese similarly, massive investments in understanding the US, the complexity of their domestic politics, their economic policies. So for us, it's very instinctive, and we've not really invested. For example, there's so much about bilateral.
Yeah.
Even during the elections, it was all about Kamala Harris because she's an Indian origin. Or Indian origin has won a tennis prize in Wimbledon. An Indian origin American is doing well. But when was how much our newspapers or reporters report on, the big changes that are taking place in the US, on its demographic composition, on its religious politics, on the differences between, say, North and the South, on the demographic shifts that are taking place. I mean, after all, it's a gigantic society in great churn. But we tend to see it, either it's a long mall where it's a shopping mall, or is it just about our Indian NRIs who are sitting there? But we've not really created departments that actually look at there. And that's where I think when big change is taking place in America, we are really constrained. So this idea, I mean, I ask, are the Americans out to, inveigle us into an alliance? And then somebody else says, are Americans going to really support it? Look, he's not doing you a favor. He's having a problem with China. You have a problem with China. You're saying, okay, let's find some common ground, see whether we can coordinate our policies. It's not as if he's doing us a favor, we are doing him a favor, but we don't see what's going on in the US because, as I mentioned in the later part of the article, I mean, the amount of changes that are taking place, which is huge, but there is very little coverage of that in our media.
In fact, one of those changes, I'm sure it will be part of a future column, but I must ask, is that it is for the first time since, say, New Labour in Britain, since Tony Blair, and then since the Reagan-Thatcher, this thing in the States, Thatcher in Britain, then New Labour was a real, so Clinton actually, Reagan was still a Republican conservative. Is the idea that the neoliberal consensus in American society, and then by extension in global capitalism, is actually eroding, and where does India find, how will that affect our trade, our policies, how we interact with the US in the future? I think just a quick word on that. That's a much deeper conversation.
Yeah, exactly, because that is the big change. I mean, I think, what started under Reagan in the US, the Democrats, both Clinton and Obama, simply embraced it. Yeah. And they became the bigger champions of globalization and free trade. While today Biden is breaking from that because he needs to win back. His domestic politics demands a readjustment. So both on neoliberal economic policies as well as on globalization, the US is changing its policy. But here we are constantly worried about America imposing globalization on us. But the question is, he's retreating from globalization. What does that mean? How does it affect our trade policies or other things? On technology, for example. Clinton and Obama thought nothing, the fantastic that they have these big tech companies. Today, the Democrats are talking about breaking up Amazon. Yeah. They're talking about restraining Apple. So they have a great debates on how to deal with monopolies, how to deal with the threat to democracy from this social media companies. But we don't follow those debates. It just becomes between us and them all the time. And I think that's a big weakness. But I think because America's size, whatever it does is going to have an effect on everyone. How it regulates its technologies, the rules it sets for digital game. I mean, so I think we have a stake in following these. But those who do it are really a few sections in the business and others, but there's no intellectual effort understanding the transformation within the US.
Great, sir. Thanks so much. We will see you next week. The same thing.